mean, I think it's helped me in life in general, but because before I did it, and I think most people who, I mean, I'm a barrister by profession, and I think most people who are in business or run their own business who are professionals like to be in control of everything. They like to be able to micromanage everything, make sure like the quality is controlled on everything they do or everything they produce. And going into that situation, it was very alien to me. I'm usually the one who's in control of a situation. So, you know, if I've got a client who comes to me and we're at court, the situation is usually very unusual for them, but it's very familiar to me. And they're looking to me to direct them through the process, because being in court is not a process most people are familiar with. And so going into that environment, it was very strange to sort of submit all control over everything that was going to happen in my life over to a load of people who I had no idea who they were. And not only did I have no idea who they were, but not just that, but what they had planned for me. So there was no schedule. We didn't know from daylight how long it was going to last. So we didn't even know when it was going to start. So it started with us getting kidnapped off a coach. And on the coach, we thought we were on our way to a hotel, because we'd flown into Santiago in Chile, and then we were traveling up into the Andes, and we were told it was going to start in a couple of days. Now, we all thought we'd have some time for acclimatization time because we were taking sort of 3,500 meters up into the Andes. So, you know, the altitude's pretty severe up there. And it literally started as soon as we got past the snow line on the mountains, going to the hotel that we thought we were going to. We just got kidnapped off the bus, and then it started. And from that moment on, we didn't know how long it was going to last, whether it would take a week, whether it would take 10 days, whether it would take 2 weeks, whether it would be there for a month. We didn't know. Hadn't really been given any information by the production company in that respect, other than, you know, don't expect to be back at work for 3 to 4 weeks. And then you just don't know what's going to happen from day to day, what time you're going to be getting up, what time you're going to be allowed to go to bed, when you're going to be fed, how much you're going to be fed, what you're going to be eating, when the next activity is going to be starting. You know, nothing. Don't really even know what time it is because they don't allow you to have watches, although I did sneak mine in and they didn't take it off me until about halfway through. I didn't realize I had it on. So all of that did really change my mindset regarding micromanaging things and being in control, because I've always felt as if I needed to do that in order to be successful in whatever I'm doing, be completely in control of absolutely everything, not just that I'm doing, but that everyone else is doing as well. And couldn't do that at all on SAS. And so it does actively teach you how to sort of exist more, control what you can control, which it might be some really insignificant variables, but just get really, you know, on top of those, get really on top of like, so really small stuff on SAS, but really important stuff. So it was your admin, your personal admin, making sure your bag was packed very efficiently, making sure your clothes that you had were properly in your dry bag, so that if we did get taken out in the middle of the night and thrown in a lake or whatever they wanted to do to us, I'd have a dry pair of clothes to put on, make sure that my clothes that I was wearing after I'd done that task went straight into the drying room in order to be dry for when the next could be taken out. Making sure that your mess tins and stuff like that were all properly cleaned out, so that you weren't going to get ill, because people did start to get ill. Making sure that you had, you repacked your bag with any snacks, or we didn't really have snacks, but leftover food and that sort of thing. So just really small things that most of the time you'd kind of overlook as being incidentals in the bigger picture. When you've not got control over those bigger things, focusing on those smaller things was really helpful, because it did give you a sense of control and a sense of purpose in terms of what you were doing. And also it made the bigger things that we were doing a lot easier, because those people who weren't on top of those small admin tasks were the ones who really suffered. And I think that is something which I've taken into this situation and lockdown, because it's made me realise that you don't always have to be in control of stuff. That sometimes things will be out of your control, and worrying about them is pointless, because there's nothing you can do about it. And the best thing to do is to try and control those small variables, whether it's, and this is what I've been trying to do during this period, is trying to upskill, debrief on my work and see, what it is that I've done well over the past couple of years, what it is that I've not done so well on, what it is that I've been happy with in my job, what it is that I've not been happy with, where I could improve my service levels, where I could improve my knowledge base. There's loads of e-learning resources that you can take pretty much in every field, so trying to upskill on those, so that when everything picks back up again, that actually I'll be in a better place, both personally and professionally, than I was before this all started. Because in the meantime, there's not a lot you can do. You can't change the situation unless you're developing vaccines or cures, and so the rest of us mere mortals just have to get on with it until we're told what we are and aren't allowed to do. So keeping on top of those things that you can control, I think is a big thing that I've taken away. When you can't control the bigger picture.
And just one more question for me, because I'm sure other people have got questions. From a leadership point of view, when you were kind of kidnapped, you're obviously aware you're on a TV program. But so
Yeah.
First question is, when do you realise this is not going to be fun? And then when do you think, right, there's going to be a winner in this at the end? So how do I become the leader in this? Or do you wait your time to start trying to find your own leadership qualities?
Well, they say I did a lot of reading about it before, did my research into the people that have taken the course and things that they've written and that other people had written. Spoke to some people that I knew that had been in the military, in the Marines and things like that, about the best way to sort of play it. The first moment that I realised it wasn't going to be fun was when we got kidnapped off the bus. They literally threw flashbang grenades into the bus. So went off and there was no punches pulled. They were basically stun grenades. I couldn't hear anything after it had gone off. It felt like I'd just been punched in the head. And then the next thing is I'll look up and there's a guy with a balaclava on stood over me, and I was wearing a jacket with a hood on it, and he grabbed me by the hood, dragged me down the coach so forcefully that it ripped the hood clean off my coat that I was wearing, and then just grabbed me by the scruff of the neck and threw me out of the coach that we were on. Now, there was no walking me down the steps. He genuinely threw me face first from about 4 or 5 steps up on the coach straight into the dirt, and continued to drag me off the coach and laid me face down in the snow for about 10 minutes and told me not to move. So at that moment, I knew it wasn't going to be fun. And then pretty much immediately after they'd briefed us and told us what was going on, we had to do a 10K run over rocky terrain with no warm up or preparation for it. Still couldn't hear for about 4 or 5 hours after it, and we were just pelted all the way down this rocky slope to meet a vehicle. And at that point, I thought, yeah, okay, they're not going to pull any punches here. This isn't staged. I kind of had that impression anyway from watching it from previous series, but people do ask about that. How much of it's sort of made in Chelsea staged and retakes, and we want you to do this now and this, or could you say this? None of it's like that. It is very authentic, or as authentic as it can be from the first moment it starts. And then in terms of leadership, they talk about in the special forces, they talk about the grey man. So you don't want to stick out really. So I'm naturally quite a loud character. And so for quite a long period of certainly for the initial few days, and it stretched into probably the first full week that we were there, I tried to keep a very low profile. I think in one of the episodes, it's probably about 4 or 5. In fact, it's probably one of the later episodes, probably maybe episode 4, and there's only 6 of them each series. Jason Fox talks about me and says, he's quiet, he's dark horse. We all know one of those in the forces, or in the in the regiment. And I remember my wife and my mum looking at me going, who's he talking about? Because you're not quiet or a dark horse. You're very much an open book, and so that's something I took into there. And I think the key for me in terms of getting through the whole process and lasting until the very end was to just do what they told you to do. Don't ask any questions. We'll ask as few questions as possible, so to be able to do what they're asking you to do competently. And don't expect any praise or validation, because you won't get it. Even if you were the first person and you were winning the race by a full mile, they wouldn't say well done at the end of it. They'd just tell you to get your Bergen and get back on the truck. And yeah, just not to stand out for any reason really, even if it's a good reason, but certainly not for a bad reason. And then I think that the key thing is, and I think again this is something that is a transferable skill, is that you realise within that environment, and I think it's the case for, I mean, I've spoken to the guys afterwards, that the people that go on SAS selection or Special Forces selection, they tend to be the sort of top people that, you know, they're the big fish in their pond in their particular sections of the army or the Marines or whatever. And they say, you know, that if you get there and you try and sort of assert your dominance over these people, you probably end up, you know, coming a crappie. You miss the bigger picture. You'll take your eye off the ball and you'll end up competing with somebody else, which isn't the aim of the game. They try and create a team of leaders. So rather than having one leader and other people follow, they'll have a team where everybody can lead if necessary. But when you're not being required to lead, you have to be a good follower as well. So it definitely taught me that, because in my professional life, I'm often the person who's, right, I'll tell you what to do, you do it, don't ask any questions, I know best. Whereas in that environment and looking at what they wanted, that isn't what they wanted. When they ask you to do something, they want you to lead to the best of your ability. When you have problems or you feel like you haven't got the skill set to do it, they want you to own up to that and say, right, I'm in charge of this particular group today. But, you know, I know, for example, the task that I got asked to lead was where we had to, you didn't see it on TV, but we had to climb across these bunkers. So the accommodation blocks that we were in were sort of rounded bunkers. And they put us in teams, and they're probably about 20 foot high, completely rounded surface on them, concrete. And they put us in teams of 5 or 6 people and gave us a rope and said, right, you're not allowed to go round. You're not allowed to climb up the side of the bunkers. So they had windows on them, so you couldn't use any of that. It had to be straight over the flat surface. And they said, you know, you need to be able to, there's about 10 of these in a row. You've got to get over them all as a team, and you've got to get back as a team. And every person has to go over each one, and you can't set off to the next one until everybody's over, and everybody's got to get back over. You've got one rope, 5 people. How are you going to do it? And so the first thing we tried to do was like take basically a run up and see if you could get up onto it, and then pull the rest of the people up. Realised we couldn't do that. And halfway through the first one, when it had taken me a couple of minutes and we weren't really getting anywhere with what we were wanting to do because we couldn't send someone round and pull people over, there was a lad in my team who was a fireman. And I said to him, you know, I turned around and said, look, this is out of my comfort zone, really. Obviously, you're a fireman. Have you got any suggestions here? What would you do if you were trying to rescue somebody without a ladder, you know, in a high place without a ladder? How would you go up there? And he said, well, try a human ladder, you know, because we're on a slope here. Get people standing on each other's shoulders, and we'll get somebody up onto the top, and we'll pull everyone up onto the top. And then you weren't allowed to slide down the other side. And so said, we'll keep one person on the top, lower everyone down, cantilever them over, and get everyone across to the other side. And then the last person will remain on the top. We'll build a human ladder again, and then you can climb down. And out of all the teams that were working on that particular thing, everybody managed to do the task. But afterwards, when we debriefed, despite the fact that I felt like I hadn't led particularly well because I hadn't been able to come up with the idea, which ultimately led us to being successful in the task, when we debriefed with the SAS guys afterwards, they said, you know, they picked out our team and said, I'm actually really pleased with what Team Alpha did on that task. Because, you know, Rich was struggling to come up with an idea that was going to get them across, you know, get the task completed, rather than continuing with a bum idea. He, you know, opened it up and realised that his skill set probably wasn't suited to, you know, to this task. Opened it up to the rest of the team, got an idea from somebody else who had a better skill set in that respect, and then implemented, you know, then took back leadership and implemented that plan. So it did, you know, things like that did affect the way in which I then went back into my job and, you know, everyday life, because, you know, prior to that point, you always think of leadership as being, you know, the person who's in control of everything, in charge, comes up with all the ideas. You know, when things go well, you take responsibility. When things go badly, you take responsibility. And I'm not saying that those aren't important parts of leadership, but there's also, you know, other elements to it as well, including, you know, being able to put your hand up and take ownership where you haven't got, you know, the necessary skills, hand it over to your team, because, you know, without the rest of that team, we wouldn't have got over, you know, that task. And, you know, also learning to be a good follower as well. So when I wasn't the leader of a particular task, being able to take instructions and, you know, hopefully add something to the team, even when I'm not, you know, dragging it by the scruff of the neck, which is what I, you know, quite often like to do. And I think a lot of the people on there, that was their sort of inclination to try and, you know, take on everything and, you know, drag the team across the line, regardless of, you know, what it took. So, yeah.
Throughout your time, how long were you there for in total?
I think it was like 13 days in total.
Okay.
The last couple of days blur into one because we weren't put to bed, so there was no concept of day or night, because the last stage of it is where you get it's called resistance to interrogation. You've probably seen it, where they put the bags over your head and the noise and the sensory deprivation, etc., and they put you in stress positions and they just leave you like that for hours and hours and hours, intermittently coming in and taking you out for interrogation, where they try and get information out of you, and that process is just, it's timeless. You don't know what time of day it is, you don't know how long you've been in there, because of the comfort you're in and the pain you're in, getting doused with freezing cold, like -10 there anyway, but we get taken outside, stripped off, doused in freezing cold water and left in, you know, put in dog cages or put in holes in the ground and, you know, left in there for what felt like hours, probably wasn't. It's almost impossible to tell how long that last part lasts, really. I think it was about 24 hours in total that we were doing that. But yeah, the last few days, it kind of all blurs into one, because there's no food, no sleep, and for the last 24 hours or so, there's no even concept of what's going on around you.
Did you find it easy to trust in your fellow competitors, contestants, for want of a better word?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely went in there initially thinking, right, I'm here to win this. I'm not here to make friends. Like, I'm here to, you're all aiming for the same thing, so I've got to beat all of you. But very quickly you realise that, in fact, you're not going to get very far with that kind of attitude, and it kind of goes out the window in any event, because you strip down to absolutely nothing. And those are the only resources and people that you've got in order to help you get through it. So trying to be competitive against those people is counterproductive, really. And after a few days, like, you're all best friends anyway, because you're going through such an extreme experience. It's something that no one, you know, it's very difficult after the event. And I found that when I came home, for other people to kind of understand it, because it is so extreme. So actually you just bond with that group very strongly, rather than trying to compete against each other, even though you are in direct competition.
And you didn't see the likes of Foxy and Mr. Middleton. They don't break their persona at all. Are they absolutely on it? You don't see any other side of them?
So for the first, I mean, I think they say, so if we're there for, say, 12, 13 days, I'd say for the first 7 or 8, what they're trying to do is to break as many people as possible and get them to quit, or to weed out the people that they'll get rid of. So, some people will just refuse to quit, but they're not got it in them, so they'll get rid of them. There's some people on there that they can break, and they will break them. I mean, everybody's breakable to some extent, but they identify them pretty quickly, and then just work on breaking them until they quit, or they can show weakness and get rid of them. So for the first week, they're just horrible, as in, you get nothing back from them. No matter what happens, no matter how well you do a task, there's always going to be an excuse to punish you. So, one of the worst things we had to do is we'd all done this forward abseil down the cliff, where you sort of like run down the face of the cliff. And we've been out there in the freezing cold all day because it took forever to film it and get everyone up. This was when there was a lot of people still left. I think, probably maybe 1 or 2 people had gone, so they had to get through 20 odd people and film it all. And we've been in the freezing cold all day with no food, like limited water, all waiting for our turn to do this. And after we'd finished, we thought we were going to go back to the camp because we'd been out since maybe 6 a.m. It was like 4 p.m. All we'd done is sit in the freezing cold. And at the end, the Ant Middleton goes, right, everyone get over to the foot of that slope. There's a scree slope with a load of shale and scree on it and snow, which was like waist deep. And he said, because you lot were all talking whilst we were doing that activity, like you're now gonna get punished for it. And we ended up being beasted for probably 2 hours up and down this slope. So like initially they'd make you run up the slope round somebody at the top, probably about 60 or 70 meters up, which doesn't sound far, but when you try to run through snow and you're just sinking up to your waist, it's almost impossible to run in. Everyone's falling over. I think you saw some of it on there. People are, going down the slope head first. They're telling you that if you come last, they're going to get rid of you. Then they get you, then they say, right, get your backpacks on and do it with your backpacks on. Then they say, right, get your partner on your shoulder and do it with a partner carrying them up there. And then they say, right, do it with your partner and both of your backpacks on. And they do that and just trying to get people to quit. So yeah, they'll find any excuse to do it. And it became apparent, and I spoke to them afterwards, they said, there isn't always a reason why we do it. There's no specific reason that we do it. It's just the fuck 'em out factor. So we're going to do it regardless. So even if you did the task absolutely perfectly, we'd look round and we'd find somebody whose button was undone on their trousers and we'd make you do it for that reason. Or you'd be talking, so we'd make you do it for that reason. It doesn't matter what you'd have done or how well you'd have done it. You'd have been running up that hill regardless because we'd have made up an excuse to get you to do it. And so they're just horrible for those first, a good portion of the course, just to try and break the people they can. And then probably by about day 8 or 9, when it was down to sort of the finalists, really, the ones that were going to go the full length of the course or get to the final stage of interrogation, they then start being more nice to you. So in the breaks between, so for example, we run up a mountain, get to the top or whatever, and are then waiting for clearance to go down for the to do the next task with the safety team or from the production team or whatever, who are down on the other side of the mountain. They might say, right, sit down, get your water bottles out, get some water down you. And then during those moments of downtime later on in the course, they would actually talk to you and mentor you a bit, say, you need to try and do this, or, you're doing well, you're one of the front runners here, or, just those little nuggets of encouragement and mentoring, rather than just trying to, break you down, because at that point they knew who they wanted really. When it got to the end, they knew who they wanted to be there, and they knew that you had, what it took, or at least the raw materials. So initially always horrible, never broke persona, but towards the end of the course, more mentoring, more pastoral, if you can use that term, because they're still not very nice. Ant, however, comes in and gets his stick and sat on the floor. I mean, at one point I was sat on the floor with my arms out in front of me, and they put you in these stress positions, which look really easy to begin with. And you sat there and, you think, I can sit there like this for 5 minutes with your legs out in front of you straight, with your back straight, with your arms out in front completely straight. After 5 minutes starts to ache a bit. After you've been there an hour, it's almost impossible. And then they come along with anything they can find. So it might just be a little stick or something. They'll put it on your arms and it feels like they've just put, a tree on your arms that's that heavy and you can't keep them up. And they'll keep you in these positions for hours up on end. And it's not just like, if you break form, if your back starts to round, they'll come in and knee you in the back in order to get your back straight. And I remember probably about halfway through the interrogation process, my arms kept dropping. I just couldn't keep my arms up. And there are all sorts of different stress positions they put you in, but that's probably the one that I remember the most because it was the most uncomfortable. And talk about being a sadist. Somebody, I don't know who it was, because there's a whole interrogation team, came up to me and took my earphone off, because I've obviously got screaming babies and slaughtered pigs in my ear. and says to me, "If you drop your arms one more time, I'm going to F you up." So I was like, well, he's not going to really, is he? Because we're all on camera. And, you know, this TV, it's not the real thing. So anyway, I tried to keep my arms up, and about 5 minutes later, whatever, they dropped again. And I didn't put them back up. And I thought, oh, it's gone quiet. You know, usually within seconds they'd be on you and pull your arms back up. No breaks. I let my arms drop, and nobody came and took them up. I was like, brilliant. So I sat there for like maybe 30 seconds thinking, oh, I've got away with this. I'll have a bit of a rest. Anyway, the next thing, obviously I couldn't see it, but I can only assume that it was a kick. Someone took like a running kick and kicked me straight in the stomach. So hard that, you know, when it wins you so badly that you're like, kicked me so hard that I ended up like on my side on the floor, like retching and not being able to get my breath. And then the guy grabbed me by the hair, pulled me up, sat me up, took my earphone off again and said, "I told you I'd pick you up." Put my earphones back on me. I was like, did they get that on camera? And then they just put you back in that position. So yeah, I don't think that was any of the DS. I think that was part of the interrogation team, who were all, you know, ex-Marines, ex-SBS, you know, Special Reconnaissance Unit, and etc. But yeah, they don't pull any punches.
Morning, Rick.
Hi, yeah, morning.
Yeah. So in terms of your experience of the show and other things you've done, what would you say makes a great leader? In terms of leadership, would you say, you know, getting an SAS mentality is totally different than being a leader in business?
To be honest, I think it's definitely. I mean, I'm not saying that I've not been in the SAS. You know, I've done something for, you know, a couple of weeks, whereas these guys have spent years, you know, as professional soldiers, and then go through, you know, the selection process, and even then, it's, you know, that's just their gateway into life within the special forces. But there's one thing you do sort of pick up from them, is that they do look at things very differently. They take extreme ownership of situations. So there's no passing the buck or finger pointing or blaming, and they expect the very same from you. You know, when something goes wrong, they expect you to put your hand up and take ownership for it if it's your fault. You know, so there's no backstabbing or bitching in, you know, in the units or the groups that you put in, because everybody is expected to take ownership for their own failings and their own, you know, and their own successes as well. And also not to try and compete with one another, because you're all there for the same goal. So rather than trying to impose your opinion or your way of working on everybody else, when it might not be the best way, you to try and work in a more collaborative way, and to have a team of leaders rather than just one person, a load of people who, you know, just have to do what they say. And then from the flip side as well, you know, in that's because you are all expected to be, you know, leaders within a team, to also be a good follower as well. So, you know, that your time to lead or be in charge or to come up with the ideas will come. But when it's not your time, or it's not your set of skills that's required, to be able to just implement what's being asked of you, do it to the best of your ability, and to try and do it without question, so as to, you know, not try and compete for you know, for dominance in a, you know, particular situation. And I think all of that's really, really good transferable skills, because when we talk about leadership, we often talk about you know, being the head of the group and what it takes in order to, you know, to be in charge of a group of people, manage a group of people. But sometimes good leadership actually comes from good fellowship, I think. And that definitely showed when we were put into groups on the show, and the way in which they tried to mentor us was away from that, you know, away from that situation where one person is in control and one person is responsible, and making sure that everybody feels responsible, everybody feels as if they have some degree of control, everyone feels as if they're valued. But there's a time to speak and there's a time to shut up as well.
Did you find physically you can prepare? Because I know that you do a lot of training and you are a very fit guy, but mentally, how did you go about preparing yourself for the mental challenge that you were going to face?
You can definitely prepare for it to a certain extent, but then to a certain extent you've either got it or you've not. It doesn't come from, you know, a few weeks of, you know, doing something, or, you know, psychological preparation. It comes from just whether or not you've got that kind of mentality or not. I mean, my mentality has always been, doesn't matter what it is or how insignificant it is to somebody else. If it matters to me, I'll get there, or I'll die trying. You know, there'll never be a situation where I quit. There was never going to be an option where I put my hand up and said, you know, I'm withdrawing here. It was never going to happen. The only way I was going to go was if they took me off the course themselves. And people have asked me that, said, you know, was there any point on that course where you thought you were going to quit? You know, that you were nearly at the end of your tether. And I was like, well, there were times when I was nearly at the end of my tether. Like, it felt like I was at the end of my tether, but it never crossed my mind to quit, because I would have stayed there, you know, for as long as it took, done whatever they said until basically I either decided that I'd won or they decided that I hadn't. And even because I got to there was 4 of us that managed to get to the very end of the course. So at the end of the interrogation phase, there was 4 of us left standing. And at that point, obviously, they then had to decide who was going to win and, you know, who wasn't. And unfortunately, I didn't win. I was one of the people who, you know, they took my hood off, and I was they said, this is the end of the course. And I fully expected them to say, all right, you know, congratulations, you passed. And they said, you've completed the course, but, you know, I'm sorry, you've not been successful. I was like, oh, my God, and people said, how did that feel? And at that moment in time, if they'd have said to me, you know, what I wanted to say was, right, well, we'll just start again. Like, if it was an option, I would have said, right, just put me back in, go right back to the start 2 weeks ago. Despite everything I've been through, we'll just start straight again. We'll go. And that's just, you know, kind of always been my mentality, you know, regardless really, in my professional life, my personal life, in, you know, sporting, anything. You know, I'm not always going to win, but it'll never be for want of trying. It'll never be for, you know, because I've you know, decided it's too much. And definitely physical training does help me with that, because, you know, you can push yourself into some pretty dark places, and when things get really uncomfortable, you start to realize what you're capable of, and in fact, you know, what your brain tells you to do is usually what your body will do. So, you know, if you go into something with a mentality that in fact you can give up, you probably will give up at some point. If you go into a situation with a mentality that you know the failure is not an option, and that you're just not going to quit, then you probably won't quit. It's when you start actually doubting yourself that comes in. And I saw that loads on the TV show. As soon as anybody started talking about going home, or that a task was hard, or they started doubting themselves over it, or saying, I'm not sure how much further I can go with this, it was a matter of hours before they caved. That negative self-talk started, that was it, they were done. Nobody came back from it. Yeah, and they say, you know, I mean, if you read their books and you speak to them and listen to their stories as well, it's true. I mean, I noticed it firsthand. As soon as anybody they allowed themselves to consider the opportunity of quitting, that's ultimately what happened. As soon as you even consider it, that's what happened. People will quit because they'll just find an excuse. It gnaws away at you. It's like an insidious process. Once you think, actually, I don't need to be here, or I could stop doing this, you know, it just became a self-fulfilling prophecy. And there was no way back from it. We were at the airport at 6 a.m. the next morning, so went to bed at maybe 10, back up at 2 o'clock in the morning, on a bus to the airport to get, you know, to the airport for 6, and then on a flight at 8. So in less than 12 hours after the process had finished, I was on a flight back to Manchester, which was 22 hours, I think. Or flight back to London, and then a 2-hour train journey back to Manchester. Psychologically, had an hour's debrief with a psychologist, but it was straight after the process, and everything's just done. Yeah, so I remember when Ant took my hood off and spoke to me, he was just like, how do you feel? And I just said, I feel a bit broken. Like, you know, didn't really have any concept of how it affected me at that point. So when you speak to the psychologist, you know, in the debrief, you know, you don't really talk about a lot. You just, you know, all right, yeah, fine. Like, was anything that you found well, it was all a bit horrible. You know, you have a bit of a cry probably, and, you know, talk about a few bits, and then you get sent on your way home. And then the psychologists were pretty good, because they'd follow you up every week, and before the show aired and stuff, they would, you know, ring you and ask you how you felt about what was going to be shown and stuff. But yeah, it was hard to readjust, because you go back to everyday life, and everything feels very grey. You've gone from sort of operating at a level that you probably never operated at before, this like high frequency of operating, and then you come back to everyday life and it's very humdrum and it just feels like very unfulfilling, and there's something missing. I think that someone likened it, I thought it was really good, and it was in fact it's one of the SAS guys said, this is what it feels like when you come back from, you've had a small taste of what it would be like, coming back from an operation. And, we had this like time and time again. And, he said like the best way I can describe it is that if you've ever seen that film, The Hurt Locker, where he comes back from Afghanistan or whatever, and he's walking through the supermarket, and in the film, they mute all the colours. So like everything is just grey. Like the music that they're playing is really like, just dull and lifeless. Everything is just dull and lifeless. And that's kind of how it felt, because, your adrenaline had been operating at 99% capacity for 2 weeks. You've been in this really unfamiliar environment where, grenades can go off at any moment, or you get dragged out of bed, or you get thrown off, bridges, and, thrown into freezing cold water, and, diving under frozen lakes and all the rest of it. And then all of a sudden you're back, buying, a Snickers from a BP garage on your way to Stoke to do a whatever. So that's, that was difficult.
How do you fill the void now then? How did you fill the void?
To be honest, it's difficult. I mean, it's finding other stuff that you enjoy, because going back to all the other things that I enjoyed beforehand, it definitely felt unfulfilling. It felt as if like, well, this is all just a bit pointless. It doesn't scratch the itch. So since then I've done, other stuff. So I've done quite a few sort of like charity related challenges. So I did an ultra marathon in the Sahara Desert, but put a 10 kilo weighted vest on and did it in that. So just finding really hard stuff to do. So that was 53 miles in a 10 kilo weighted vest in like 40-degree heat. Then what else did I do? I carried a 40 kilo barbell. So a 20 kilo barbell with 20 kilos on the barbell as well. I carried that up Mount Snowdon and back down for charity. I've applied to break a world record and hopefully get clearance for that in a few weeks' time. Just doing things that like really push you outside of your comfort zone in order to sort of like, you definitely crave that challenge. It becomes a bit of a sick obsession really, because it's it's something to give you that same high.
Can I ask a question? After you came back, what's changed for you in the way you are as a barrister?
I think to be honest, taking things a little bit less personally. So I've always been extremely competitive, and I still am very competitive, but trying to be a little bit more objective. When things don't necessarily go my way, the tendency is to take things very personally. Whereas now it's given me a bit more objectivity that, if sometimes, despite the best preparation, despite everything you do, you just don't have the right case. It's sometimes it doesn't matter what it is, you're not going to have the right ammunition to be able to win your case or to hammer home a particular point that you want to. It's just not going to happen. It's not down to whether or not you've done your job properly or not, and you can't take it personally. It's just, you're only as good as your brief sometimes. Because being a barrister, it is like being a sportsman in some respects, because it's a competitive environment. You go into court and you've got a trial. One party's going to win and one party's going to lose. And if you need to be competitive in order to be able to do it, because if it doesn't matter to you, then you're not going to be a particularly good barrister in that competitive environment, no matter what your legal knowledge or advocacy skills are like. But at the same time, it's very easy to take things personally. And, definitely during my earlier career, when you first start out, if anything goes against you, you do take it very personally. Whereas after coming back from SAS, you start to realize, and, by going through that debriefing process, rather than just, stewing on things, you can actually deconstruct what's happened over the course of a case and say, right, well, okay, this is where it went right, this is where it went wrong. Did anything go right because of things I did, but yeah, this and this were good because of the way I did it in this particular way. Did anything go wrong because of anything I did? Or maybe this could have been better, or that piece of evidence wasn't as good, but there's nothing I could have done about that, or the preparation on that wasn't great because the solicitor hadn't prepared the witness statement quite as well as they could have done, or when I was taking the client through in conference, perhaps I should have foreseen that they might be questioned about that particular thing, and going through it a bit more dispassionately and methodically, and using that debriefing process, which I hadn't previously utilised, definitely that helped sort of improve my performance after going on the programme.
Would you do it all again?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
No hesitation.
No hesitation. I would have done it the moment they said, the full course is finished. Really sorry you didn't, you didn't pass. To have it felt like I'd run the hardest race of my life, got to within like an inch of the finish line, and then all of the crowds had disappeared. They'd just taken up the finish line and everyone had gone home. Like the feeling of like deflation despite everything you've gone through, to get to that point. I mean, they call it, apparently in Special Forces, they call it stand-up fail, which is, people do get to the end of a Special Forces selection. They go through 6 months of absolute hell, running through the mountains, the first course, the hills phase, and they do the jungle phase. Then they come back and they do, escape and evasion, resistance to interrogation. The whole process takes, 6 months. And this is having spent years already in an elite unit, whether it's the paras or whether it's the Marines, which is where most of them come from. And, then they do this 6 month, which is absolute hell on earth. And they get all the way to the end. They get all the way through the interrogation, all the way through the debrief, and then literally as they're about to get on the bus to go back to the Hereford or wherever it is that they're heading back to, they just get pulled to one side and say, "Sorry, you're not passed. Like you're not getting on the bus. You're heading on the other transporter back to wherever it is." And yeah, they call it stand-up fail, and one of the hardest things that any sort of person can, if you fail halfway through or you get sent home halfway through, that's that's kind of palatable. If you get all the way to the end and you've done it all, and then you just get told that you've not quite made the grade, that's one of the hardest things. In fact, I've spoken to a couple of the guys that were DS on the show, and I think at least one of them had it happen to him before he passed the next time. He said, to be able to then go back and think, should I reapply again? Would I do it again? Put myself through 6 months, and I might have done 12 months of all of it. I'll have done it twice through, and I might still not have got to where I want to be. They said, it's a difficult thing to swallow. But if they'd have asked me at that moment in time, and if you asked me now, put me back in straight away tomorrow. Okay.
Richard, have you got any more questions?
Oh, I've got loads, but I'll not ask any more. Innes, come on, you're a.
Well, I was going to ask: was there something that you suddenly realised you were fearful of that you hadn't thought? Whether it was the cold or the water or heights or something of that nature that sort of surprised yourself.
Hadn't really. I mean, this might sound really strange, but I'm not really scared of many things. There isn't really anything that I could put my finger on to be scared. And that's not because I don't have any fears. I do have fears, but I tend to be able to rationalize them pretty well. So, if you put me on, so one of the tasks that we had to do was to walk across a ladder over a waterfall into a ravine. It was like a 300-foot drop. So when you look down, all you could see is blackness and the water just disappearing into the blackness. You couldn't see the bottom. You couldn't, it was so far that if you fell, you'd be dead before you hit the bottom. If someone said to me, walk across that without a safety rope on, absolutely no way. I'd absolutely cack my pants. I wouldn't be able to set foot on it because it's rational. If you fall off, if I fell off that, I'd lose my balance, trip over one of the rungs, whatever happens, you're dead. Whereas, when you've got a rope attached to you, it's like, well, unless the rope fails or the rope snaps or something happens, I'm not going to die. So, I realized that it's controlled within about 99% of what it can be. So, the risks are relatively low. And so I'm quite good at being able to sort of, risk assess it. Probably comes from my job to a certain extent, and rationalize whether or not it's something to be afraid of or not. And the thing is that it is very well controlled. They've got great safety teams on there.